Chapter 1. The Christmas Invitation. The snow fell gently over St. Mary Mead, blanketing the village in a hush that seemed to whisper of Christmas secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat by her parlour window, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she watched the flakes dance. Her cottage, cosy with the glow of a single lamp, smelled faintly of lavender, and the pine wreath hung above the hearth. It was December 23rd, 1932, and the village was abuzz with preparations for the festive season. A sharp rap at the door broke her reverie. Miss Marple set aside her knitting, a half-finished scarf for her nephew Raymond, and rose, smoothing her tweed skirt. She opened the door to find young Tommy Pierce, the postman's boy, shivering in his too-thin coat, a letter clutched in his mittened hand. "Evening, Miss Marple," Tommy said, his breath fogging in the chill air. "Got a letter for you. Special delivery from Ashford Manor." "Thank you, Tommy," Miss Marple replied, her keen eyes noting the elegant cream envelope with its embossed crest. "Do come in and warm yourself by the fire." "Oh, no, miss. I've 3 more deliveries before supper," Tommy said, tipping his cap. "Merry Christmas!" He scampered off into the snow, leaving Miss Marple with the letter. She returned to her chair, adjusting her spectacles to examine the envelope. The crest belonged to the Ashford family, whose manor loomed on the hill overlooking St. Mary Mead. Lady Beatrice Ashford, the widowed matriarch, was known for her grand Christmas Eve balls, though Miss Marple had never been invited until now. With a delicate flick of her letter opener, she revealed an invitation written in precise, looping script. "Dear Miss Marple, you are cordially invited to the Christmas Eve ball at Ashford Manor on December 24th, 1932 at 7 o'clock. Your presence would greatly honour our gathering. Yours sincerely, Beatrice Ashford." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. An invitation from Lady Ashford was unexpected, to say the least. The Ashfords were a family of old money and older secrets, their manor a stage for whispered scandals that never quite reached the village gossip. Miss Marple, with her knack for noticing what others overlooked, had heard murmurs of discord among the family, something about a contested will and a mysterious heirloom. Why invite her, a spinster of modest means, to such an affair? "Curious," she murmured, her fingers tracing the invitation's edge. "Very curious indeed." The next evening, Miss Marple stepped from the village taxi onto the gravel drive of Ashford Manor. The house glowed against the snowy dusk, its windows ablaze with candlelight, and the strains of a string quartet drifted through the frosted air. She wore her best black silk dress, a lace shawl draped over her shoulders, and her sharp eyes took in every detail. The polished footman at the door, the faint scuff on his left shoe, the nervous twitch of his fingers as he took her coat. The ballroom was a vision of Christmas splendour. A towering fir tree stood adorned with glass baubles and tinsel, and garlands of holly festooned the walls. Guests in evening gowns and tailcoats mingled, their laughter tinged with a brittleness Miss Marple recognised all too well. Lady Beatrice Ashford, resplendent in emerald velvet, greeted her with a practised smile. "Miss Marple, how delightful you could come," Lady Beatrice said, her voice smooth, but her eyes darting to the crowd. "I trust you'll enjoy our little gathering." "I'm sure I shall," Miss Marple replied, her tone mild. "Your invitations are rare, Lady Ashford. I'm most flattered." Lady Beatrice's smile tightened. "We thought it time to include fresh perspectives. Do make yourself at home." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze already wandering to the guests. There was young Clara Ashford, Lady Beatrice's niece, whispering heatedly with a dashing man in a military uniform, Captain Hugh Rutherford, if memory served. Across the room, Sir Reginald Ashford, Lady Beatrice's brother-in-law, sipped his brandy with a scowl, his wife, Margot, hovering anxiously at his side. And near the Christmas tree, a dour-faced governess, Miss Evelyn Grey, watched the room with an intensity that piqued Miss Marple's curiosity. As the quartet struck up a waltz, Miss Marple accepted a glass of mulled wine from a passing tray, her eyes lingering on a peculiar object on the mantel. A wooden nutcracker, its painted face stern and its jaw cracked, as if it had seen better days. Something about it unsettled her, though she couldn't say why. "Charming, isn't it?" a voice said at her elbow. It was Mr. Percival Fortescue, the Ashford solicitor, a man with a pinched face and a habit of rubbing his hands together. "That nutcracker's been in the family for generations. They say it's cursed, you know." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of polite interest. "Cursed? How intriguing! Do tell." Mr. Fortescue leaned closer, his voice dropping. "They say it belonged to old Lord Ashford, Beatrice's late husband. He swore it brought misfortune to anyone who crossed the family. Nonsense, of course, but the servants won't touch it." "Fascinating," Miss Marple said, her eyes never leaving the nutcracker. "And yet it holds pride of place tonight." Before Mr. Fortescue could reply, a piercing scream cut through the music. The quartet faltered, and the crowd parted to reveal Clara Ashford, pale as the snow outside, pointing to the floor near the Christmas tree. There, sprawled in a pool of candlelight, lay Captain Rutherford, his eyes wide and lifeless, a broken piece of the nutcracker clutched in his rigid hand. Miss Marple's knitting needles, had they been in her hands, would have stilled. As it was, her mind began to knit together the first threads of a mystery that promised to unravel the festive cheer of Ashford Manor. Before we move on, Detective, where in the world are you solving mysteries with us? Drop your location in the comments, and if you're craving more twisted tales, hit subscribe. Tomorrow's case file gets even darker. Stay sharp. Chapter 2. The Nutcracker's Curse. The ballroom of Ashford Manor, moments ago a whirl of festive gaiety, now stood frozen in the wake of Clara Ashford's scream. The string quartet's bows hung silent, and the guests clustered in uneasy knots, their faces pale under the chandelier's glow. Captain Hugh Rutherford lay sprawled near the Christmas tree, his military uniform stark against the polished floor, a splintered piece of the wooden nutcracker gripped in his hand. Miss Jane Marple, standing near the mantel, sipped her mulled wine, her eyes darting from face to face, noting every flicker of fear, guilt, or curiosity. Lady Beatrice Ashford pushed through the crowd, her emerald gown rustling. "Good heavens, what's happened?" she demanded, though her voice trembled. She stopped short at the sight of the body, her hand flying to her throat. "Hugh!" Clara, still trembling, was being comforted by Margot Ashford, whose nervous hands fluttered like moths. "He was just standing there," Clara stammered, her eyes wide. "We were talking, and then he clutched his chest and fell. That thing was in his hand." Miss Marple's gaze settled on the broken nutcracker piece, its painted jaw jagged and menacing. She stepped closer, her black silk dress whispering against the floor, and knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb it. The captain's face was contorted, his lips faintly blue, and a faint bitter scent lingered in the air. Almonds, perhaps, though not from the Christmas confections. "Poison, I should think," Miss Marple murmured, almost to herself. She glanced at the nutcracker fragment, its wood unnaturally dark, as if stained by something more than age. Sir Reginald Ashford, his brandy glass still in hand, barked, Poison? Preposterous! The man probably had a weak heart. Too much excitement, that's all. Perhaps, Miss Marple said mildly, rising to her feet. But the nutcracker in his hand is rather peculiar, wouldn't you say? The room buzzed with whispers. Mr. Percival Fortescue, the solicitor, hovered nearby, wringing his hands. "I told you, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "That nutcracker's cursed. Old Lord Ashford swore it carried a grudge." "Nonsense," Lady Beatrice snapped, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "Percival, don't fill their heads with that old tale." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of polite curiosity. "I'd like to hear it, if you please, Mr. Fortescue. Stories often have a grain of truth." The solicitor hesitated, glancing at Lady Beatrice, who gave a curt nod. "Very well," he said. "The nutcracker was a gift to Lord Ashford, Beatrice's late husband, from a German toymaker in 1890. The toymaker claimed it was enchanted, meant to guard the family's honour. But Lord Ashford, in his final days, raved that it would punish anyone who betrayed the Ashfords. When he died, the nutcracker was found cracked, and strange deaths followed. Servants, cousins, even a guest, always with that thing nearby." The governess, Miss Evelyn Grey, spoke up from the edge of the crowd, her voice sharp. "Superstition! The captain was perfectly healthy this morning. I saw him walking the grounds." "Did you now?" Miss Marple said, her eyes lingering on Miss Grey's tense posture. "And did you notice anything unusual about him?" Miss Grey's lips tightened. He seemed agitated, kept looking over his shoulder, as if someone was watching. The local constable, Mr. Hargreaves, arrived, puffing from his trek through the snow. He was a stout man with a walrus moustache, more accustomed to petty theft than murder. "Right then," he said, surveying the scene. "No one's to leave until we sort this out. Dr. Simmons is on his way to examine the body." Miss Marple stepped back, allowing the constable to take charge. Though she noted his clumsy handling of the scene, his boots scuffing near the body, his questions loud and haphazard, she drifted toward the Christmas tree, where a young footman, Albert, was clearing away abandoned glasses. His hands shook, and his eyes kept darting to the nutcracker piece. "Albert, isn't it?" Miss Marple said gently. "You look troubled, my dear." The boy started, nearly dropping a glass. "It's nothing, miss," he mumbled. Just that nutcracker. They say it moves at night. I saw it on the mantel earlier, whole and proper. Now it's broken again." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "How very interesting. And when did you last see it whole?" "Just before the dancing started," Albert said, his voice barely a whisper. "I swear it, miss." Before Miss Marple could press further, a gust of wind rattled the windows, and the lights flickered. Outside, the snow was thickening, piling against the manor's walls. Lady Beatrice clapped her hands, her voice strained but firm. "The storm's worsening. No one can leave tonight. Rooms will be prepared for all guests." A murmur of unease rippled through the crowd. Miss Marple, however, felt a quiet thrill. A snowbound manor, a dead man, and a cursed nutcracker. St. Mary Mead had never seen such a Christmas. She tucked her shawl closer, her mind already weaving the threads of suspicion, ready to unravel the truth hidden in Ashford Manor's festive shadows. Chapter 3. Snowbound Secrets. The snow fell relentlessly outside Ashford Manor, piling high against the windows and sealing the grand house in a cocoon of white. Inside, the air was thick with unease, the festive glow of the Christmas Eve ball, dimmed by the shadow of Captain Rutherford's death. The guests, now unwilling prisoners of the storm, milled about the Whodunit, a faux drawing-room, their voices low and their glances guarded. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly in a high-backed chair near the fire, her hands folded in her lap, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Lady Beatrice Ashford stood at the room's centre, attempting to restore order. "My friends, please," she said, her voice strained but resolute. "The storm will pass by morning. We've ample rooms prepared, and dinner will be served shortly. Let us not lose our Christmas spirit." Christmas spirit. Sir Reginald Ashford snorted, his brandy glass refilled despite the early hour. A man's dead, Beatrice, hardly the time for carols and mince pies. Margot Ashford, his wife, touched his arm nervously. "Reginald, please, not in front of the guests." Miss Marple noted the exchange, her gaze drifting to Clara Ashford, who sat alone by a window, staring into the snow. The young woman's face was pale, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. Miss Marple rose, her movements deliberate, and approached her. "Miss Ashford," she said gently, "you must be dreadfully shaken. Would you care to sit by the fire? It's warmer there." Clara's eyes flicked up, wary but grateful. "Thank you, Miss Marple. I can't stop seeing him, Hugh, lying there with that awful nutcracker." "It was a terrible shock," Miss Marple agreed, settling beside her. "You were speaking with him just before, weren't you? He must have been a dear friend." Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. "He was kind to me. We talked of the future, of leaving St. Mary Mead. He had plans, you know, big plans." "Did he?" Miss Marple's tone was soft, encouraging. "And did he seem himself tonight?" Clara's gaze darted away. "He was nervous. Kept looking at that nutcracker on the mantel. Said it gave him the chills, like it was watching him." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "How curious. And did anyone else share his unease?" Before Clara could answer, a sharp voice cut in. "Clara, you shouldn't trouble Miss Marple with such nonsense." It was Miss Evelyn Grey, the governess, her dark eyes glinting as she approached. "The poor man had a weak heart, no doubt. All this talk of curses is childish." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of mild surprise. "You seem quite certain, Miss Grey. Did you know Captain Rutherford well?" The governess stiffened. "Not well, no. I saw him about the manor, that's all. He was charming, but reckless. Always talking of investments and grand ventures." "Reckless," Miss Marple echoed, her voice thoughtful. "An interesting choice of word." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Simmons, a wiry man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose. He had examined the body in the ballroom and now addressed the room, his tone grave. "Constable Hargreaves asked me to report. Captain Rutherford was indeed poisoned. Cyanide, I'd wager, from the symptoms and that almond-like odour. Death was swift, likely within minutes." A gasp rippled through the room. Lady Beatrice swayed, clutching a chair for support. "Poison! Here, in my home!" "Afraid so, my lady," Dr. Simmons said. "The constable's searching the ballroom now, but with this storm, no one's going anywhere. He'll need statements from everyone." Miss Marple's eyes flickered to the other guests. Mr. Percival Fortescue, the solicitor, was whispering to Sir Reginald, whose scowl deepened. Margot Ashford fussed with her pearls, her hands trembling. The footman, Albert, lingered near the door, his face ashen as he avoided looking at the mantel, where the remaining piece of the nutcracker still stood, its painted eyes gleaming in the firelight. As the guests dispersed to their rooms to await dinner, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze settling on a small detail she'd overlooked. A faint smudge of red wax on the floor, near where Captain Rutherford had fallen. It was barely noticeable, but to Miss Marple it was as loud as a shout. She recalled seeing a sealed letter in Lady Beatrice's hand earlier that evening, its wax the same shade. Curious, she thought, that it should appear here. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and Miss Marple felt a familiar prickle of anticipation. The manor was a puzzle, its pieces scattered among the guests' secrets and lies. As she made her way to her assigned room, she passed a maid, Elsie, who was whispering to Albert in the corridor. "It's that nutcracker, I tell you," Elsie hissed. "It's got a mind of its own. I saw it move last night, I swear." "Nonsense," Albert muttered, but his voice shook. "It's just wood, isn't it?" Miss Marple paused, unseen in the shadows, her mind turning over the maid's words. Wood, perhaps, but wood could hide many things, secrets, motives, even poison. The snowbound manor was a stage, and the players were already revealing their parts. She would watch and listen and wait for the next crack in the facade. Chapter 4. The Shadow of the Past. The dining room of Ashford Manor glowed with candlelight, its long mahogany table laden with a Christmas feast that belied the grim mood. Roast goose, plum pudding, and crystal decanters of wine gleamed under the chandelier, but the guests' appetites were subdued, their conversation stilted. Miss Jane Marple sat near the end of the table, her modest black silk dress a contrast to the glittering gowns around her. Her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, flitted from face to face, noting the strange smiles and furtive glances. Lady Beatrice Ashford presided over the table, her composure brittle as she urged the guests to eat. "We mustn't let this tragedy spoil our Christmas," she said, though her voice wavered. "Captain Rutherford would have wanted us to carry on." "Carry on?" Sir Reginald Ashford muttered, his fork clattering against his plate. "The man's been poisoned, Beatrice. Someone in this room is a murderer." A hush fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the blizzard outside. Margot Ashford, Sir Reginald's wife, gave a nervous laugh. "Really, Reginald? Must you be so dramatic? It could have been an accident." "An accident?" Clara Ashford's voice was sharp, her eyes red-rimmed as she glared across the table. "Hugh was healthy as a horse. Someone meant to kill him." Miss Marple sipped her wine, her expression serene but her mind alert. She noted Clara's clenched fists, Margot's twitching fingers, and the way Miss Evelyn Grey, the governess, stared fixedly at her plate, avoiding all eyes. Mr. Percival Fortescue, the solicitor, cleared his throat, his hands rubbing together as if to ward off the chill of suspicion. "Perhaps," Miss Marple said mildly, "we might consider what Captain Rutherford was doing before he met his end. Miss Ashford, you mentioned he was agitated. Did he speak of anyone in particular?" Clara hesitated, her gaze flickering to Lady Beatrice. He mentioned an old family matter. Something about Uncle Charles, Lord Ashford, I mean. He said it was a shame that still haunted the manor." Lady Beatrice's fork froze midway to her mouth. "Clara, that's quite enough. Old gossip has no place here." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Old gossip often has roots, Lady Ashford. I've found village tales, however fanciful, can shed light on present troubles." The room grew quieter still. Sir Reginald drained his glass and leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "If you must know, Miss Marple, my brother Charles was a fool. Got himself tangled in a scandal back in '98. Some nonsense about a missing maid and a stolen heirloom. The Nutcracker, of all things, was part of it." "Reginald," Lady Beatrice's voice was sharp, "that was settled years ago." "Was it?" Miss Marple asked, her tone gentle but probing. "I couldn't help but notice the Nutcracker's prominence tonight. Mr. Fortescue mentioned a curse, and young Albert the footman seemed quite frightened of it." Mr. Fortescue coughed, his face reddening. "Mere superstition, Miss Marple. The maid, Rose, her name was, disappeared after Charles's death. Some said she stole the Nutcracker, others that she would dispatch to keep her quiet. But there was no proof, only rumours." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Rumours, Mr. Fortescue, are like snowflakes. Each one seems small, but together they can bury the truth." As the meal continued, Miss Marple excused herself, citing a need for air. She slipped into the corridor, her footsteps muffled by the thick rugs, and made her way to the library. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp, its shelves heavy with leather-bound volumes. On a side table, she found what she sought, a family album, its pages yellowed with age. She turned the pages carefully, pausing at a bout, photograph dated 1898. It showed Lord Charles Ashford, stern and imposing, standing beside a young woman with a timid smile. Rose, perhaps? In the background, barely visible, was the Nutcracker, whole and gleaming. A handwritten note beneath the photo read, "To Rose, with gratitude, Charles." Miss Marple's brow furrowed. Gratitude for what? She closed the album as footsteps approached, tucking it back into place. It was Elsie, the maid, carrying a tray of coffee cups. Her eyes widened at the sight of Miss Marple. "Oh, miss, you startled me," Elsie said, her voice trembling. "Didn't expect anyone here." "Just indulging my curiosity," Miss Marple said with a smile. "Elsie, you mentioned the Nutcracker moving last night. Did you see anything else unusual? Perhaps someone near it?" Elsie hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. I saw Miss Grey in the ballroom, late. She was holding the Nutcracker, staring at it like it was cursed. Gave me the shivers, miss." "Thank you, Elsie," Miss Marple said, patting the girl's arm. "You've been most helpful." As Elsie hurried away, Miss Marple returned to the dining room, her mind turning over the new piece of the puzzle. A missing maid, a grateful lord, and a governess with a peculiar interest in the Nutcracker. The storm outside raged on, but inside Ashford Manor a different storm was brewing, one of secrets long buried, now stirring to life. Miss Marple settled back into her chair, ready to watch the next act unfold. Chapter 5. A Second Crack. The snow continued its relentless assault on Ashford Manor, the wind howling like a chorus of restless spirits. Inside, the guests had retired to their rooms after a tense dinner, but sleep eluded most. The spectre of Captain Rutherford's murder hung over the house, and the Nutcracker's supposed curse whispered in every shadowed corner. Miss Jane Marple, however, was far from restful. She sat in her guest room, a small fire crackling in the grate, her mind piecing together the fragments of the evening's revelations. A sharp cry shattered the midnight silence, echoing through the manor's corridors. Miss Marple rose swiftly, wrapping her shawl about her shoulders, and stepped into the hallway. Other doors opened, and bleary-eyed guests emerged, their faces a mix of dread and curiosity. The sound had come from the west wing, where the family's private quarters lay. Lady Beatrice Ashford, her hair loose and her face pale, led the way, a candelabrum trembling in her hand. "What now?" she muttered, her voice edged with panic. Miss Marple followed, her steps measured, noting the hurried footsteps of Sir Reginald, Margot, Clara, and Miss Evelyn Grey, who clutched a shawl tightly about her thin frame. They reached a heavy oak door, slightly ajar, leading to Sir Reginald's study. Lady Beatrice pushed it open, and a collective gasp filled the air. There, slumped over his desk, was Mr. Percival Fortescue, the solicitor. His face was ashen, his eyes wide in a frozen stare, and a thin trickle of blood seeped from his lips. In his hand, clutched as if in a final act of defiance, was another splintered piece of the Nutcracker, its painted teeth bared in a grotesque grin. "Good Lord," Sir Reginald breathed, his usual bluster gone. "Not another!" Miss Marple stepped forward, her eyes scanning the scene. The room smelled faintly of bitter almonds, just as the ballroom had, and a glass of brandy sat untouched on the desk. A single candle burned low, casting flickering shadows across the solicitor's papers, one of which bore the red wax seal she'd noticed earlier, now broken. "Poison again, I presume," Miss Marple said softly, her gaze lingering on the Nutcracker fragment. "Dr. Simmons will confirm, but the signs are unmistakable." Clara Ashford, clinging to the doorframe, stifled a sob. "It's that wretched thing, the Nutcracker! It's killing us all!" "Nonsense!" Miss Evelyn Grey snapped, though her voice lacked conviction. "Someone is using that old toy to frighten us. It's no curse. It's murder." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression mild. "Indeed, Miss Grey. And yet the Nutcracker seems to find its way to the victims. How curious!" Constable Hargreaves arrived, his face flushed from running through the cold corridors. "Right, everyone back," he barked, his authority undermined by the tremor in his voice. "No one touches anything until the doctor's here." As the guests retreated, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes catching a small detail. A smudge of ink on Fortescue's fingers, and a pen lying askew on the desk, its nib wet. She glanced at the papers. A will, half-drafted, with names she recognized: Clara, Lady Beatrice, and someone named Rose. The same Rose from the 1898 scandal. Miss Marple tucked the thought away, her mind as sharp as her knitting needles. In the drawing-room, the guests gathered once more, their nerves frayed. Lady Beatrice paced, her emerald dressing-gown trailing like a storm cloud. "This is intolerable," she said. "2 deaths in one night. Constable, what are you doing about this?" "Everything I can, my lady," Hargreaves said, mopping his brow. "But this snow's got us trapped. No help's coming until morning." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her hands folded neatly. "Mr. Fortescue was working on something important, I gather," she said, her voice gentle. "A will, perhaps? That might upset certain expectations." Lady Beatrice froze, her eyes narrowing. "What are you implying, Miss Marple?" "Only that motives for murder often lie in what's left behind," Miss Marple replied, "or what's taken away." Sir Reginald snorted, but his hand shook as he poured another brandy. Fortescue was always meddling in family affairs, probably stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Margot Ashford, her face pale, whispered, "He was asking about Rose yesterday, kept saying her name like it meant something." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Did he now? And did he say why?" Margot shook her head, her pearls clicking nervously. "No, but he seemed frightened, kept looking at that Nutcracker in the ballroom." The governess, Miss Grey, stood abruptly. "This is absurd. I'm going to bed. We'll catch our deaths sitting here, fretting over fairy tales." As she left, Miss Marple noted the stiffness in her gait, the way her hand lingered on the doorframe. She recalled Elsie's words about Miss Grey handling the Nutcracker the previous night. Another thread in the tapestry, she thought. The fire crackled, and outside the snow buried the manor deeper. Miss Marple's mind turned over the clues. 2 poisonings, 2 Nutcracker fragments, and a name from the past, Rose. The curse was nonsense, of course, but someone was using it to deadly effect. As the guests dispersed, their footsteps heavy with fear, Miss Marple remained, her calm exterior hiding a mind racing to unravel the next knot in Ashford Manor's deadly puzzle. Chapter 6. Whispers in the Library. The storm raged on outside Ashford Manor, its icy fingers clawing at the windows. sealing the guests in a prison of snow and suspicion. The clock in the grand hall struck 2 in the morning, but few could sleep after the second murder. Miss Jane Marple, however, found the library a haven for her thoughts, its shelves heavy with secrets as much as books. She sat in a leather armchair by a flickering lamp, her shawl draped over her shoulders, a volume of local history open in her lap. Her eyes, though, were not on the page but on the door, waiting for the inevitable. The door creaked open, and Clara Ashford slipped inside, her face pale and her eyes haunted. She started at the sight of Miss Marple. "Oh, I didn't expect anyone here," she said, clutching a candle. "I couldn't sleep." "Nor I, my dear," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle. "A house with 2 murders is hardly conducive to rest. Would you care to sit?" Clara hesitated, then sank into a chair, her hands twisting her nightgown's hem. "It's that nutcracker," she whispered. "I know it sounds mad, but it's as if it's choosing who dies." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Objects don't choose, Miss Ashford. People do. But tell me, why was Captain Rutherford so troubled by it? You said he spoke of the future." Clara's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting eavesdroppers. He thought the nutcracker was a sign. He said Uncle Charles, Lord Ashford, had promised him something years ago, before he died. Something about the family fortune. "Promised?" Miss Marple's tone was soft, encouraging. "That's most interesting. And did Mr. Fortescue know of this promise?" Clara nodded, her voice barely audible. "Hugh said Percival was digging into old papers, trying to change the will. He was furious about it." Before Miss Marple could probe further, the door opened again, admitting Sir Reginald Ashford, his face flushed from brandy. "What's this, a midnight conclave?" he said, his voice gruff. "Clara, you should be in bed." "I might say the same of you, Sir Reginald," Miss Marple said mildly. "But since we're here, perhaps you could shed light on Mr. Fortescue's work. He was revising a will, I understand." Sir Reginald's eyes narrowed. Meddling fool, that's what he was. Always poking into Charles's affairs. Wanted to dig up every old scandal, including that business with Rose. Miss Marple tilted her head. "The maid who disappeared. I found her name in a family album, with a note from Lord Ashford. 'To Rose, with gratitude.' Quite curious, don't you think?" Sir Reginald snorted, but his hand trembled as he lit a cigarette. "Gratitude for what? She was a nobody, vanished with half the silver, if you ask me. Charles was too soft on her." The door creaked again, and Miss Evelyn Grey entered, her dark eyes sharp despite the late hour. "Talking of Rose, are we?" she said, her voice cool. "She seems to haunt this house more than any curse." Miss Marple's gaze settled on the governess, noting the faint flush on her cheeks. "You seem well informed, Miss Grey. Did you know her?" Miss Grey's lips tightened. "I was a child when she disappeared. But the servants talk. They say she was Lord Ashford's favourite. Some thought she knew too much about his affairs." "Affairs of the heart, or of the estate?" Miss Marple asked, her tone deceptively light. Miss Grey's eyes flashed. "Both, perhaps, but it's ancient history. Why dwell on it when we've 2 dead men to account for?" "History has a way of repeating itself," Miss Marple said, closing the book in her lap. "Like a crack in a nutcracker, small at first, but spreading until the whole thing shatters." An uneasy silence fell. Clara shivered. Sir Reginald puffed on his cigarette, and Miss Grey's fingers twitched as if itching to flee. Miss Marple noted it all, her mind cataloguing their reactions like stitches in a pattern. The library door opened once more, revealing Elsie the maid, her face pale as she clutched a duster. "Beg pardon, miss," Elsie stammered, addressing Miss Marple. "I was cleaning and I found something in Mr. Fortescue's room. A letter hidden in his desk. It had your name on it, Miss Clara." Clara's breath caught. My name. Elsie handed over a crumpled envelope, sealed with red wax, the same shade Miss Marple had seen near Captain Rutherford's body. Clara tore it open, her hands shaking, and read aloud in a faltering voice, "Clara, beware the Nutcracker. It sees all. P.F." Sir Reginald swore under his breath. More of Percival's dramatics. The man was unhinged. "Or warning someone," Miss Marple said softly. "Perhaps he knew too much, like Rose." Miss Grey turned abruptly, muttering about needing rest, and left the room. Sir Reginald followed, grumbling, leaving Clara and Miss Marple alone. Clara clutched the letter, her eyes wide. "What does it mean, Miss Marple? Is the Nutcracker really cursed?" Miss Marple patted her hand. "Not cursed, my dear, but used. Someone wants us to believe in its power, and that, I think, is the key to this puzzle." As Clara left, her candle casting long shadows, Miss Marple remained in the library, her mind turning over the new clues. A hidden letter, a warning, and a maid from the past whose name echoed through the murders. The snow outside buried the manor deeper, but Miss Marple felt the truth drawing closer, hidden in the whispers of Ashford Manor's shadowed walls. Chapter 7. The Midnight Carolers. The snowstorm howled outside Ashford Manor, its icy gusts rattling the windows as if demanding entry. Inside, the guests and staff gathered in the drawing-room, their faces drawn from sleeplessness and fear. 2 murders in a single night had frayed their nerves, and the relentless blizzard ensured no escape. Miss Jane Marple sat near the fire, her shawl draped over her shoulders, her calm demeanour a quiet anchor amidst the tension. The clock chimed 11, and Lady Beatrice Ashford, desperate to restore some semblance of festive cheer, clapped her hands. "We shan't let this dreadful night ruin Christmas," she declared, her voice brittle. "Let's have some carols. Elsie, Albert, fetch the hymnals. A bit of music will lift our spirits." The maid, Elsie, and the footman, Albert, exchanged uneasy glances but obeyed, distributing tattered hymnals among the guests. A small group formed near the piano, where Clara Ashford, her eyes still red from crying, began to play Silent Night. The notes wavered at first, but soon the room filled with hesitant voices. The melody a fragile thread against the storm's roar. Miss Marple joined in softly, her eyes never straying from the singers. Sir Reginald Ashford stood apart, nursing a brandy and muttering about damned foolishness. Margot, his wife, sang with a forced smile, her hands twisting her pearls. Miss Evelyn Grey, the governess, stood rigidly, her lips moving but her voice inaudible, her gaze fixed on the mantel where the remaining piece of the Nutcracker loomed, its painted eyes glinting in the firelight. As the carol reached its second verse, a strange sound interrupted. A low, creaking groan from the direction of the ballroom. The singing faltered, and Clara's hands froze on the keys. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Probably the wind," Sir Reginald said gruffly, but his hand tightened on his glass. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "It sounded rather like wood," she said mildly. "Perhaps we should investigate." Lady Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. Constable Hargreaves, would you lead the way?" The constable, his walrus moustache twitching, hefted a lantern and led the group toward the ballroom, the guests trailing like reluctant shadows. Miss Marple followed, noting Albert's reluctance as he lingered at the rear, his face pale. The ballroom was dark, the Christmas tree's candles long extinguished, but the nutcracker on the mantel seemed to glow faintly, its cracked jaw a silent accusation. Hargreaves raised his lantern, and a collective gasp rose from the group. On the floor, near the spot where Captain Rutherford had died, lay a splintered wooden panel from the wall, its edges jagged as if pried open. Inside the recess was a small dusty box, its lid ajar, revealing a glint of metal, a locket engraved with the initial R. "Rose," Margot whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's got to be hers." Miss Marple knelt, her movements careful, and examined the box without touching it. "How curious," she said. This panel was hidden, yet someone knew exactly where to look. Elsie, hovering nearby, let out a small cry. "It's the nutcracker's doing. I told you, miss, it moves at night. It's showing us things." "Nonsense," Miss Grey snapped, but her hands were clenched, her knuckles white. "Someone's playing a cruel trick, that's all." Miss Marple's gaze flicked to the governess, then to Albert, who was staring at the locket with a strange intensity. "Albert," she said gently, "you seem troubled. Did you know about this hiding place?" The footman flinched, his eyes darting to the nutcracker. "No, miss," he stammered, "but I heard Mr. Fortescue talking to the captain a few days ago. They mentioned a locket, said it was proof of something. Something about the Ashford inheritance." Clara's breath caught. "Proof? You never told me about any locket." "Perhaps he meant to," Miss Marple said, her tone soft but probing. "And perhaps someone else knew what it signified." Constable Hargreaves, puffing with importance, took charge of the box, wrapping it in a handkerchief. "I'll keep this safe until morning," he said. "No one's to touch it." As the group returned to the drawing-room, the carols forgotten, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the nutcracker. Its presence was no coincidence, she was certain. The locket, the hidden panel, the murders of Rutherford and Fortescue, all were threads in a tapestry woven decades ago. She recalled the photograph of Rose, the maid, and Lord Ashford's note of gratitude. The locket's R was no coincidence either. Lady Beatrice, her face drawn, tried to rally the group. "Let's try another carol," she said weakly. "Something cheerful." But the mood was broken. The guests' voices hollow as they murmured, "God rest you merry gentlemen." Miss Marple joined in, her mind elsewhere, piecing together the connections. 2 men dead, both linked to the nutcracker and a mysterious locket. A maid whose disappearance had never been explained. And a manor full of people guarding their secrets. The storm outside was fierce, but the storm within Ashford Manor was deadlier still. And Miss Marple knew the next clue was waiting to be found. Chapter 8. The Locked Room. The snowstorm's fury showed no sign of abating, cloaking Ashford Manor in a suffocating white silence, broken only by the occasional groan of the wind. Inside, the guests had retreated to their rooms after the unsettling discovery of the locket in the ballroom, but the air thrummed with unease. Miss Jane Marple, however, remained vigilant, her mind sifting through the clues. 2 poisonings, a cursed nutcracker, a hidden locket, and a maid named Rose, whose shadow loomed over the manor's secrets. She sat in her room, her knitting needles idle, when a muffled crash echoed from the east wing, followed by a cry of alarm. Miss Marple rose swiftly, slipping on her shawl and stepping into the corridor. Other doors opened, and sleepy, anxious faces appeared. Lady Beatrice, Clara, Sir Reginald, and Margot, all drawn by the sound. Constable Hargreaves, his nightcap askew, led the way, his lantern casting jittery shadows. The noise had come from Miss Evelyn Grey's room, its heavy door locked tight. "Miss Grey!" Hargreaves called, pounding on the door. "Are you all right?" A faint groan answered, and after a tense moment, the lock clicked, and the door creaked open. Miss Grey stood there, her face pale, her dark hair dishevelled, a trickle of blood on her temple. Behind her, the room was in disarray. A chair overturned, a mirror cracked, and on the floor, another splintered piece of the nutcracker, its painted eye staring blankly. "Good heavens!" Lady Beatrice exclaimed, clutching her dressing gown. "What happened, Evelyn?" Miss Grey swayed, gripping the doorframe. "Someone attacked me," she said, her voice shaky. "I locked my door before bed, but I woke to a shadow over me. They struck me, and then nothing. I must have fainted." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed as she stepped into the room, her gaze sweeping the scene. The window was shut tight, its latch secure, and the snow piled high outside ruled out any external entry. The key still hung in the lock, undisturbed. "A locked room," she murmured, her tone thoughtful. "Most intriguing." Constable Hargreaves, puffing with effort, examined the door. "No sign of tampering," he said. "How could anyone get in?" "Perhaps they didn't need to," Miss Marple said mildly, her eyes on Miss Grey's trembling hands. "Miss Grey, you say you were struck. Did you see your attacker?" Miss Grey shook her head, wincing. "It was dark. I only saw a shadow, tall and quick, and that nutcracker piece. It wasn't there when I went to bed." Clara Ashford, hovering in the doorway, gasped. "It's that cursed thing again! It's after all of us!" "Nonsense!" Sir Reginald snapped, though his voice lacked conviction. "Someone's playing a cruel game, that's all." Miss Marple knelt beside the nutcracker fragment, noting its jagged edge, as if freshly broken. She glanced at the bedside table, where a glass of water sat untouched, its surface rippling slightly, as if disturbed. "Curious," she said softly. "The nutcracker seems to multiply its pieces at will." Dr. Simmons arrived, summoned from his guest room, and examined Miss Grey's injury. "A nasty bump, but she'll be fine," he said, dabbing her temple with a cloth. "No signs of poison, thank heaven." As the doctor tended to Miss Grey, Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the room's details. A faint scuff mark on the floor near the bed, a single hairpin out of place on the dresser, and a faint smell, not almonds this time, but something sharper, like polish or wax. She recalled the red wax seal from the letter in Fortescue's room, and the smudge near Rutherford's body. A pattern was forming, though its shape remained elusive. "Miss Grey," Miss Marple said gently, "you mentioned the nutcracker wasn't here earlier. Did you lock your door immediately after entering tonight?" Miss Grey nodded, her eyes wary. "Of course, I always do, especially after everything." "And yet someone entered," Miss Marple said, her tone deceptively light. "Or perhaps they were already here." The governess's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Lady Beatrice, her face drawn, ushered the group out. "Enough for tonight," she said. "Evelyn needs rest, and we all need our wits about us." As the guests dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, her eyes on the nutcracker fragment now in Hargreaves's custody. She approached Albert the footman, who was hovering nervously in the corridor, his hands twisting his cap. "Albert," she said softly, "you've been most helpful about the nutcracker. Did you see anyone near Miss Grey's room tonight?" The boy hesitated, his eyes darting to the shadows. I saw someone, miss, but I couldn't swear to it. A figure, moving quick-like, near the east wing stairs. I thought it was one of the guests, but it was too dark to tell." "Thank you, Albert," Miss Marple said, patting his arm. "You've a good eye, even in the dark." As she returned to her room, the manor's silence felt heavier, the storm outside a mere echo of the turmoil within. A locked room, a shadowy attacker, and another piece of the Nutcracker. Someone was orchestrating this deadly play with care. Miss Marple's mind turned over the clues. Rose's locket, Fortescue's warning, and now an assault that defied a locked door. The truth was close, she felt, hidden in the manor's crevices, like snow in a crack, waiting for her to brush it away. Chapter 9. Cracks in the Facade. The snowbound night pressed heavily on Ashford Manor. The storm's relentless howl, a grim counterpoint to the unease within. Dawn was still hours away, but the guests, shaken by the attack on Miss Evelyn Grey, gathered in the drawing room, their faces etched with exhaustion and suspicion. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly in a corner, her shawl neatly draped, her hands folded as if in prayer, though her sharp eyes missed nothing. The Nutcracker's shadow loomed larger with each incident. 2 murders, an assault, and fragments of the cursed object appearing like grim omens. Yet Miss Marple knew the truth lay not in curses, but in human hearts. Constable Hargreaves, his walrus moustache drooping with fatigue, stood before the group, notebook in hand. "Right then," he said, his voice gruff. "I need to know where everyone was when Miss Grey was attacked. Let's have it, one at a time." Lady Beatrice Ashford, her emerald dressing gown exchanged for a severe black dress, spoke first. "I was in my room, preparing for bed. I heard nothing until the crash woke me." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. "And your room is in the West Wing, Lady Ashford. Quite far from Miss Grey's, I believe." Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "Yes, quite far. I'm a light sleeper, but the storm muffled everything." Sir Reginald Ashford, slumped in an armchair, waved a hand. "I was in my room too. Had a nightcap and dozed off. Didn't hear a thing until the commotion." "Alone, Sir Reginald?" Miss Marple asked, her tone mild. He bristled. "Of course. Margot was in her own room, fussing with her creams and what not." Margot Ashford, her pearls gleaming in the firelight, nodded quickly. "I was applying my face cream when I heard the cry. I thought it was the wind at first." Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Margot's trembling hands. "How curious. I seem to recall you mentioned earlier that you were reading in the library after dinner. Did you return there before retiring?" Margot flushed, her fingers twisting her pearls. "Oh, yes, I popped in for a book, but I was in my room by midnight." Clara Ashford, pale and drawn, spoke next, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was in my room, trying to sleep. I kept thinking about Hugh and Mr. Fortescue. I didn't hear anything until the crash." Miss Marple tilted her head. "You were fond of Captain Rutherford, weren't you, my dear? Did he ever mention anyone who might wish him harm?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "No, but he said someone was watching him. He thought it was about the will, something Mr. Fortescue knew." Miss Evelyn Grey, a bandage on her temple, sat stiffly, her dark eyes wary. "I was attacked, as you know," she said curtly. "I locked my door at 10 and didn't open it until the constable knocked." "And yet someone entered," Miss Marple said softly. "Or perhaps they were already inside. Did you notice anything unusual before you retired, Miss Grey?" The governess hesitated, her fingers tightening on her shawl. I thought I heard footsteps outside my door earlier, but I assumed it was a servant." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind, her spectacles. "Footsteps, you say? And yet Albert, the footman, told me he was in the servants' quarters after 11, polishing silver with Elsie." The room grew still, the fires crackled loud in the silence. Hargreaves scribbled in his notebook, his brow furrowed. "Right then. Anyone else see or hear anything?" Elsie, hovering near the door with a tray of tea, spoke up, her voice trembling. "I was with Albert, sir, like Miss Marple said, but I saw Miss Clara in the corridor near the east wing, just before midnight. She looked upset." Clara's head snapped up. "I was in my room. You must be mistaken, Elsie." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind was at work. "Mistakes are easily made in a house this large," she said, "but Elsie's eyes are sharp, as are Albert's. He mentioned seeing a figure near the east wing stairs, didn't he?" Albert, summoned from the corridor, nodded reluctantly. "Aye, miss. I couldn't see who it was, but they were moving quick, like they didn't want to be seen." Sir Reginald snorted. "This is absurd. You're accusing us all based on a boy's fancy and a maid's gossip." "Not accusing," Miss Marple said gently, "merely observing. Alibis, like facades, can crack under scrutiny. And cracks, I find, often reveal what's hidden beneath." Lady Beatrice stood abruptly. "This is intolerable. Constable, surely you can do more than question us like common criminals." "I'm doing my best, my lady," Hargreaves said, mopping his brow. "But with this snow, we're stuck until morning. I'll need to search the rooms for evidence." As the guests murmured their protests, Miss Marple's gaze settled on a small detail she'd overlooked. A faint smudge of red wax on the hem of Miss Grey's shawl, barely visible in the firelight. It matched the wax from Fortescue's letter and the smudge near Rutherford's body. She filed it away, her mind weaving the threads tighter, conflicting alibis, a hidden locket, a warning letter, and now a governess with a mark that tied her to the crimes. The storm outside raged on, but Miss Marple felt the truth drawing closer, like a melody emerging from discord. The manor's inhabitants were hiding more than fear, and she would watch, listen, and wait for the next crack to reveal the killer's hand. Chapter 10. The Nutcracker's Origin. The first light of dawn crept through the snow-laden windows of Ashford Manor, casting a pale glow over the weary guests. The storm had eased, though the snow still blocked the roads, trapping all within the manor's walls. Miss Jane Marple, however, saw opportunity in the brief lull. Bundled in her coat and scarf, she slipped out early, leaving a note for Constable Hargreaves that she was visiting St. Mary Mead's village to clear her thoughts. In truth, her thoughts were sharp as ever, fixed on the Nutcracker and its tangled history. The village lay hushed under a chithayuv, blanket of snow, its cottages like sugared confections. Miss Marple's boots crunched along the path to a small shop at the edge of St. Mary Mead. Its sign faded but legible. Herr Meller, toymaker. The old German craftsman, long retired, was known for his intricate creations, including, she suspected, the Ashford family's cursed nutcracker. She knocked, and after a moment the door creaked open, revealing a stooped figure with white hair and eyes like polished oak. "Miss Marple," Herr Müller said, his accent softened by years in England. "An unexpected visit on such a morning. Come, warm yourself." The shop was a marvel of wood shavings and half-finished toys, smelling of varnish and pine. A fire crackled in the corner, and Miss Marple settled into a chair, her hands folded neatly. "Herr Müller," she began, her tone gentle, "I've come about the Nutcracker at Ashford Manor. I believe you made it." The toymaker's eyes flickered, and he busied himself with a carving knife. "Ja, I made it long ago. For Lord Charles Ashford in 1890. A special commission, he called it." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Special, you say? I've heard tales of a curse. What can you tell me?" Herr Müller sighed, setting down his knife. "No curse, Miss Marple, but a promise. Lord Ashford came to me, troubled. He'd wronged someone, a young woman, he said. He wanted the Nutcracker as a gift, but also as a reminder. I carved it with a mechanism, a hidden spring to hold a message. He said it would protect his family's honor, but also punish betrayal. A message? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. And did he say who this young woman was? The toymaker hesitated, his hands trembling slightly. He called her Rose, a maid, I think. He was fond of her, more than proper. He said she deserved better than what he'd done. The Nutcracker was to hold a secret, something to right a wrong. I never knew what. Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the clues. Rose, the locket, the note of gratitude in the family album. And the mechanism. Could it still work? Could someone open it now? Herr Miller's face darkened. Yeah, it could, but it's dangerous. The spring is tight, meant to break if forced. I warned Lord Ashford it could be used for harm, but he insisted. Did anyone else know of this mechanism? She asked, her voice soft but probing. Only his solicitor, Mr. Fortescue's father, who handled the family's affairs then, and perhaps Rose, if Charles told her. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing as she stepped back into the snow. The Nutcracker wasn't just a relic. It was a vessel for a secret, one worth killing for. As she trudged back to the manor, the village church bells rang, a sombre reminder of Christmas morning. The manor loomed ahead, its windows glinting like eyes. Inside, the guests were gathered in the dining room, picking at a subdued breakfast. Constable Hargreaves greeted her, his face grim. Miss Marple, you shouldn't be wandering in this weather. We've enough trouble here. Quite right, Constable, she said mildly, shedding her coat. But I find a walk clarifies the mind. Have there been developments? Hargreaves lowered his voice. Found something in Fortescue's papers. A note about a codicil to Lord Ashford's will, mentioning a gift for Rose. It's got Clara's name on it too as beneficiary. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Most interesting. And where is Miss Clara now? In her room, refusing to come down, Lady Beatrice interjected, joining them. Her face was drawn, her eyes shadowed. She's distraught, poor girl. Says the Nutcracker's after her next. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the mantel, where the remaining Nutcracker piece stood, its jaw cracked but intact. She noted Miss Evelyn Grey, lingering near the door, her bandage stark against her pale skin. The governess's eyes met hers briefly, then darted away. Miss Grey, Miss Marple called softly, you seem recovered. Did you recall anything more about your attacker? The governess stiffened. Nothing, Miss Marple. It was too dark. I wish you'd stop prying. Prying is such a harsh word, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. I only wish to understand why the Nutcracker keeps appearing, and why it seems to follow certain people. As Miss Grey hurried away, Miss Marple caught a glimpse of Elsie, the maid, watching from the corridor, her face pale. The toymaker's words echoed in her mind. A hidden spring, a secret, a promise of punishment. The Nutcracker was no curse, but a tool, and someone in the manor was wielding it with deadly precision. The truth was near, hidden in the cracks of Ashford Manor's past, and Miss Marple would find it before the snow melted. Chapter 11. The Christmas Eve Confrontation. The snowstorm had settled into a brooding silence by late Christmas Eve. The drifts piling high against Ashford Manor's walls,